Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by Christoph.
Hey, everybody. It's so wonderful to have you back.
Today we are diving into a remarkable and often forgotten story from the Battle of the Atlantic. This week we are examining a dramatic encounter on the 6th of June, 1942, when the American tanker SS Stanvac Calcutta faced the German surface raider Steer. Though it involved only two ships, this engagement shines a light on the global nature of the war at sea and the danger faced by merchant shipping in the early years of America's entry into World War II. To appreciate the significance of this event, we need to understand the broader situation at sea in mid-1942. The United States had officially entered the war just 6 months earlier. The Pacific dominated the headlines with the carrier battles of the Coral Sea and at Midway. But in the Atlantic, another struggle was underway. German U-boats had launched a devastating offensive along the American coastline, an offensive the Germans referred to as the Second Happy Time.
What?
American shipping losses skyrocketed as submarines operated with bold confidence. During this period, the United States was still racing to adopt convoy systems, to expand shipbuilding, and to train Navy armed guard crews for merchant vessels. The sudden shock of entering the war meant that much of the early 1942 shipping traffic was sent to sea with minimal protection. Merchant ships steamed alone, sometimes lightly armed, and often unescorted. In these conditions, even a routine voyage was an act of courage. While submarines were the greatest threat, they were not the only one. Germany also operated disguised surface raiders. These were merchant ships converted into auxiliary cruisers, equipped with hidden guns, torpedoes, and reconnaissance equipment. Their mission was to infiltrate Allied shipping lines, pose as neutral or friendly vessels, and then strike suddenly at close range. Surface raiders had been used since the First World War, and in the early years of the Second Conflict, they had achieved considerable success. Their value was not simply in the ships they sank, but in the confusion they created among Allied shipping authorities. By 1942, German raiders were fewer in number, but still active. One of the last to operate in the Atlantic was the Steer, also known as HSK-16. Steer was armed with 6 medium-caliber guns, anti-aircraft armament, and torpedoes. She carried a small reconnaissance aircraft, and her hull was modified to hide her weaponry behind false panels. Her entire purpose was deception. She approached unsuspecting merchant ships under false identities, closed the range, and then revealed her weapons too late for the target to escape. Against such a ship, an unescorted American tanker stood little chance. But the story of the Stanvac Calcutta is not one of passivity or surrender. It is a story of a crew that fought back under impossible conditions, a crew made up primarily of merchant mariners and supported by a small detachment of Navy armed guard sailors. These were men trained mostly for defense, not for fleet action. And yet they found themselves suddenly thrust into a battle that would decide their fate. Now, before we reach the moment of contact between the two ships, we must understand the working world of the Stanvac Calcutta. She was part of the vast maritime network that sustained Allied operations. Tankers like her carried vital fuel, the substance that powered ships, aircraft, trucks, and factories. Without fuel deliveries, no navy, no matter how large, could operate for long. The merchant marine was, in many ways, the backbone of the war effort. These civilian sailors faced dangers equal to those of naval personnel, but with less recognition and often with little protection. In early 1942, the entire American maritime system was under strain. Troop movements, supply deliveries, and fuel shipments were overwhelmingly the available escorts. The U.S. Navy had not yet fully mobilized its destroyer forces, and many were still operating in the Pacific. The Army was also competing for shipping space, adding to the demands placed on tanker operators like Standard Vacuum Oil, which ran the Stanvac Calcutta. Meanwhile, the German Navy sought to exploit this vulnerability, though their surface fleet was limited. The use of raiders allowed them to strike far from Europe, hitting supply lines that the Allies struggled to defend. Surface raiders operated not only in the Atlantic, but sometimes in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. They depended on stealth, mobility, and a network of supply ships to maintain their operational reach. By June of 1942, the Steer had already begun her raiding cruise. She had slipped out past Allied patrols and was seeking vulnerable targets. Her captain understood that isolated tankers, especially those steaming alone, were prime objectives. A single tanker could carry enough fuel to support entire naval operations, and its loss could force convoy planners to reallocate valuable assets. This is the world into which the Stanvac Calcutta steamed, a world of hidden threats, deceptive ships, and unrelenting pressure on the Allies to keep the sea lanes open. The tanker did not know she was sailing into a trap. She did not know that a camouflaged enemy warship was hunting her. But the stage was set. The ocean was vast, but in that vastness, two ships were on a collision course.
Your introduction makes me think about a lot of different things. I know this is wartime, so conflict is bound to happen that we're talking about. But it really makes me appreciate the relative peace that we have in international waterways. So when we have the security of effectively the United States Navy and then previously the British Navy trying to keep lanes open, trade free, like really protecting it from bad actors, that really helped promote a lot of goodwill in trade. And it was wonderful. And just going from that mindset to one where even another tanker or another neutral ship could be a danger to you, and the risks that involves, that's quite a psychological leap. Like that's difficult. And I don't know, I certainly know that I can't fully appreciate that bravery or fear of what it takes to do that. And you're effectively doing something to supply your nation to help win a war. And at any moment that could be taken away. And that's terrifying. I will also say I'm surprised. I guess destruction is easier and allows you to reuse the ships that you're using for these ambushes better. But I know that Germany could use these resources as well, so I'm a little bit surprised they didn't capture more. But I suppose that would stretch their forces rather thin, trying to commandeer vessels and whatnot. So anyway, I want to hear more about the story.
To understand the action of June 6, 1942, we need to know the two ships and the people who served aboard them. These were not anonymous vessels clashing in a vacuum. Each had a story long before their encounter in the Atlantic. Each carried men with their own experiences, expectations, and responsibilities. Let's begin with the American ship. The Stanvac Calcutta was operated by Standard Vacuum Oil Company, often called Stanvac, a joint venture between Standard Oil of New Jersey and Standard Oil of New York. She was part of a global network designed to move oil from production centers to military and industrial hubs. Ships like her were the circulatory system of the Allied war effort. Without fuel, no aircraft flew, no destroyer patrolled, and no tank advanced. The Stanvac Calcutta was built for long-haul transport. Her design emphasized cargo capacity and reliability rather than armor or speed. Like most American tankers of the era, she had a relatively modest top speed. She carried large quantities of flammable cargo, making her vulnerable to attack. Even a single well-placed shell could ignite catastrophic fires. To enhance her defensive capability, the United States Navy assigned a small team of armed guard sailors. The armed guard was responsible for manning the defensive guns, usually a single stern gun, sometimes supplemented by a few lighter anti-aircraft weapons. Their training was practical but limited. Most of these sailors had joined the Navy just months earlier. They were taught how to fire a gun, how to maintain it, and how to handle emergency procedures, but they were not trained for ship-to-ship combat against a heavily armed adversary. The merchant crew, meanwhile, operated the ship itself. Merchant mariners were civilians, not members of the armed forces, though they faced equal danger. They lived in plain quarters, worked long hours, and were responsible for navigation, engineering, and cargo management. Many of them understood that tankers were prime targets and that their survival depended on vigilance and luck. Life aboard a tanker in early 1942 was tense. Merchant ships had become frontline assets, and everyone aboard understood the risks. Crews shared rumors of submarine sightings, of ships vanishing without a trace, and of the new German tactics that used deception to lure victims into range. Still, they carried on, confident in their training and determined to deliver their cargo. On the other side of the story was the German auxiliary cruiser Stier. She began her life as the merchant ship Cairo, built in 1936. When war came, she was taken over by the German Navy and retrofitted as a surface raider. The conversion process was extensive. Shipbuilders disguised large gun mounts beneath false walls. Panels could be dropped or swung away to reveal 6 medium-caliber naval guns. Anti-aircraft guns were concealed behind collapsible structures. Torpedo tubes were hidden behind trap doors. The Stier was not a warship in the traditional sense. She was a hybrid, part merchant ship, part cruiser, and part deception vessel. Her purpose was to blend in. The Germans gave her a variety of false identities. She carried flag sets from numerous nations and board systems allowing quick changes in hull markings. This ability to shift appearances enabled Stier to approach Allied ships without raising suspicion. The ship carried a complement of trained naval personnel, including gunners, signalmen, mechanics, and boarding parties. German raider crews were known for their discipline and for operating under difficult conditions. They were expected to be self-sufficient for long stretches, often months, with no access to friendly ports. Their voyages relied on supply ships that delivered fuel, ammunition, and food at secret rendezvous points. Stier's captain, Hurst Gerlach, was an experienced officer who understood both the tactical and psychological aspects of raider warfare. He emphasized silence, deception, and sudden violence. His job was straightforward in theory. Find isolated Allied ships, close the range under disguise, and destroy them before they can send a distress signal. The crew of the Steer trained extensively in rapid shifts, from peaceful disguise to full combat posture. Drills involved quickly opening gun ports, raising the naval ensign, and unleashing coordinated fire. German raiders depended on the first minute of combat. Surprise was their most valuable weapon. Now, daily life on the Steer was not easy. Space was limited, temperatures varied wildly depending on the ocean region, and the stress of operating in enemy-controlled waters was constant. Yet morale was generally high. Many in the crew believed they were performing a critical mission, disrupting Allied supply lines. They understood that the tonnage they sank directly impacted the broader war effort. However, they also knew the risks. Surface raiders were hunted relentlessly by Allied aircraft and escort groups. If discovered, a raider's chances of survival were slim. They were not built for sustained stand-up fights. Their armor was thin, and their engines were designed for range, not speed. A single British cruiser or an American destroyer could end a raider's cruise in minutes. This knowledge shaped the mindset aboard the Steer. Every encounter had to be controlled and calculated. Every action had to maintain the illusion of innocence until the perfect moment.
That is, I'm getting tense. I don't know about the listener, but every time you unfold a story like this, I can imagine the conflict that is to come. And when you think about the mismatch, I mean, I appreciate that there are the sailors are being trained in small arms fire and they can kind of handle themselves, but a ship-to-ship combat they do not seem prepared for, and that's exactly what Germany is counting on. And so I'm getting tense. But anyway, the only way to get through that is to conclude the story. So continue, and I'll let you know by the end how much better I feel.
By early June 1942, both ships were moving along their respective routes. The Stanvac Calcutta was steaming through a part of the Atlantic where enemy contact was possible, but not guaranteed. Her crew kept watch, scanning the horizon for periscopes or suspicious vessels. They had heard reports of U-boats. They knew the dangers. Still, their voyage continued without incident. The Steer, meanwhile, was actively searching for targets. Raider captains kept detailed logs of sightings, weather conditions, and projected shipping routes. They compared intelligence reports, assessed convoy schedules, and looked for stragglers, ships that had fallen out of convoy or sailed independently. In the days leading up to the 6th of June, the Steer had been operating with the help of a supply ship. German raiders relied on these tenders for essential resupply. They refueled, rearmed, and transferred prisoners captured from previous encounters. This resupply allowed Steer to remain active and to continue hunting. As the Steer moved away from her supply ship and into more open waters, her lookouts scanned the horizon with anticipation. German raider crews took great pride in identifying ships long before they themselves were spotted. Even the smallest plume of smoke on the horizon was examined through binoculars and telephoto lenses. On the American side, the Stanvac Calcutta was also maintaining vigilance, but the difference was stark. The American crew did not expect a disguised surface raider. They expected submarines or aircraft, threats that produced different signatures. When they saw a ship that appeared to be a merchant vessel, their danger instincts did not immediately activate. That difference in expectation would soon shape the outcome of the encounter. With both vessels at sea, with both following separate missions and unaware of each other, the conditions were set for their meeting. The vastness of the Atlantic often provides safety through distance, but on some days, it brings two ships together in a way that changes the lives of those aboard them.
Can you remind me what I remember you said 1942, but I don't remember what month. Like, is it earlier in the year or not? And the reason I'm asking is I know we enter the war December 7th, 1941, or shortly thereafter. And so I'm trying to imagine strategies were put in place at what time, and if this is early enough and this event becomes a learning opportunity or not. So what time frame are we talking about?
June,
June. Okay.
6 months after we enter the war.
That's right. You said that. My mind was spinning by that time.
A few times.
It's interesting to see how these strategies unfold over the years based on different events. And I'm sure there are some out there, I'm kind of in this camp thinking, oh, they should have done this instead. But at the same time, what information do they have to fuel that decision? You know what I mean? And so we're approaching conflict. It's making my stomach hurt a little bit, but that's okay. It could be breakfast. Yes, let's see what happens next.
The stage was quietly forming for the confrontation between the American tanker Stanvac Calcutta and the German surface raider Steer. Neither ship knew the other existed. Neither crew had any personal reason to expect a fight on this particular day. Yet the combination of weather, timing, and course made an encounter almost inevitable. To understand what happened next, we need to visualize the Atlantic. This was an ocean alive with movement. Merchant ships steamed independently or in convoys. U-boats prowled submerged or surfaced at night. Naval vessels escorted convoys or hunted submarines. Surface raiders like the Steer contributed an additional layer of complexity. The ocean is vast, but shipping density in certain lanes made contact possible. So on the morning of June 6th, the Stanvac Calcutta was maintaining her planned course. Her speed was steady, intentionally balanced between fuel economy and operational necessity. Tankers did not sprint unless they had to. They were engineered for long-haul endurance. Her crew kept watch on deck, with the armed guard manning the defensive weapons or staying nearby. The atmosphere aboard was calm, though every sailor understood the unpredictability of wartime waters. The weather was generally favorable. Vision was adequate, though light haze drifted across parts of the horizon. Seas were manageable. Under these conditions, a ship could be spotted from a considerable distance if lookouts were attentive. On board the Steer, the lookouts were always attentive. German raiders trained their observation crews extensively. Their mission depended on sighting the enemy first. At some point during the forenoon watch, a lookout aboard the Steer reported a distant plume of smoke. It was faint, but enough to attract attention. The ship slowly altered course to investigate while maintaining the appearance of an innocent trader. As the Steer closed the range, more details began to emerge. The silhouette of a tanker took shape. The German officer studied it carefully through binoculars, verifying dimensions and flag markings. They cross-referenced silhouette books and intelligence reports. They concluded that this was an American tanker steaming alone, a prime target. A solitary tanker promised fuel cargo, which was strategically valuable, and the lack of an escort suggested an easy engagement. Captain Gerlach and his officers immediately began planning their approach. Their objective was to close within decisive range without revealing their identity. The Steer assumed the markings and behavior of a neutral merchant vessel. The crew adjusted flags and external signals to maintain the deception. They remained outside gun range at first, watching the tanker's movements for any sign of suspicions. Meanwhile, aboard the Stanvac Calcutta, the distant ship was observed as well. Lookouts reported sighting a vessel approaching on a converging course. From what they could see, the ship resembled a merchantman, its hull lines and superstructure showing nothing unusual. No gun barrels protruded, no naval ensigns flew. It was, to all appearances, just another trader passing through the Atlantic. The merchant marine officers aboard the Stanvac Calcutta had seen many such ships during their voyages. They watched this one without alarm. The armed guard remained at readiness, but saw no reason to man their weapons fully. Encounters with friendly or neutral vessels were common, and unlike U-boats, which approached submerged, a surface ship appearing in the distance did not necessarily signal danger. Yet there were subtle details that might have seemed odd if viewed under a more suspicious lens. The steer maneuvered with deliberate precision, adjusting course slightly to close the range. The ship's position with respect to the wind and sun was calculated. German raider doctrine emphasized presenting the least suspicious angle while maintaining tactical advantage. But to the American crew, these minor shifts were not immediately alarming. Merchant ships often adjusted course for navigation, weather, or communication. As the distance narrowed, the steer signaled the Stanvac Calcutta. German raiders frequently used false signals to maintain the appearance of legitimacy. They might claim mechanical difficulty, request identification, or pretend to be a vessel from a neutral nation. These communications created a sense of routine interaction. The Stanvac Calcutta's bridge officers interpreted this signal as benign. They responded appropriately, unaware that every exchange brought the disguised warship closer. Inside the steer's concealed gun stations, German gunners stood ready. The false walls over the gun ports were designed to be dropped in seconds. The crew rehearsed these transitions constantly. At a moment's notice, a peaceful-looking merchant ship could transform into a fully armed raider. German officers monitored the range, calculating the exact moment when the surprise would yield maximum effect. Their goal was to strike before the American ship could send a distress signal or take evasive action. As the steer continued to close the distance, those aboard the Stanvac Calcutta remained unaware of the true threat. Their ship carried no radar capable of identifying the hostile intent. Their defensive weapons were limited and depended entirely on visual cues. And because raiders were rare compared to submarines, American merchant sailors did not routinely assume a surface ship was a disguised enemy. Eventually, the steer reached the decisive moment. The range was close enough that the raiders' guns could find their mark with deadly accuracy. The crew awaited the order. The false panels concealed the weapons perfectly. To the Americans, the German ship still looked harmless. What makes this moment fascinating is its silence. No shot had been fired. No alarm sounded. No one aboard the Stanvac Calcutta had yet grasped that they were moments away from battle. It was a quiet stage, the kind of deceptive calm that often precedes sudden violence at sea. From the German perspective, everything was proceeding according to plan. From the American perspective, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Two ships, each on their own course, had converged in a vast ocean. One carried fuel, the other carried deception and firepower. The final distance between them was small enough that the outcome would now hinge on moments. In that final minute before the attack, both crews stood at their posts. Both ships maintained course, and then, in an instant, everything changed.
Oh man, I am excited to see how this ends up. I did some questions, and I'm sure either you or maybe a listener can answer. I'm sure not a lot has changed as far as transatlantic ship traffic from World War II to now, as far as if you're shipping cargo, except for maybe the technology of the ships themselves, you're going to use a lot of common lanes, right? You're going from port to port, and some ports are bigger than others, and so you're going to see a lot of similar traffic, and ships will converge as you're on your way to Rio de Janeiro or whatever the case may be, right?
Yep.
So this was not uncommon to see another ship. What is the protocol traditionally for non-military ships, specifically merchants, when they encounter each other? Is there one? Like, apparently there's signals being communicated back and forth. Do you know what some of those typical messages would be?
Well, I mean, modern day ships all have transponders
Yeah,
that
that's
they are
true.
required to have activated at all times. So you're able to identify each other that way.
Okay.
And there are laws, just like there are road laws when you're driving a car. There are laws of operating a ship safely.
Like passing on one side versus the other, or...
Yep.
I see.
Things of that nature, how much distance you need to be maintained from each other, things of that nature.
Yeah, I was thinking...
And don't shoot at each other.
Right, I think that's implied.
No sea rage.
The distance is really where I was going also, because if you were passing another ship or converging with a ship, maybe going to a similar destination, what are the distances that you would traditionally keep as a buffer between the ships? And maybe this is I don't know if it has changed from now since this time that we're talking about, but what is gun range? What is safe range outside of hostile intent? You know what I mean? Like, if everything depends on deception, they have to act like a normal ship following the normal rules. What are the normal rules as far as spacing?
Well, you would have to ask a merchant marine that is qualified to operate a tanker and license and all that. I have no idea.
I think I know one. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. But also remember that when you're talking about gun distance, this isn't little pew-pews. This is naval artillery.
Right.
They
Bang
have
bangs.
a much greater range than, small arms.
Oh, yes, absolutely. To get within even rifle shot, if you can see the ship, you can probably hit it, but the closer, the easier, and I get that.
Yeah, I mean, battleships could shoot over the horizon.
Incredible.
So, if you could be seen, you're in gun range.
Okay.
Even if you can't be seen, you're in gun range.
I'm just thinking about the American crew right now and how the biggest threat was a submarine. And so you're constantly on the lookout for submarines. And then you see another ship and you're like, oh, it's just a ship. But it's not. And so let's continue the story. I'd like to find out how we resolve.
The moment that separated peace from violence came without announcement. 1 second, the Stanvac Calcutta saw what she believed to be a neutral merchant ship. The next second, that same ship transformed into a fully armed auxiliary cruiser of the German Navy. This kind of sudden revelation was the essence of a raider warfare. So let's walk through the battle as it unfolded. At the chosen moment, Captain Gerlache of the Steer gave the order. In a single motion, the false panels concealing the raiders' guns were dropped. What appeared to be blank walls suddenly fell away, revealing the muzzles of 6 medium-caliber naval guns. Other crewmen raised the German Navy battle ensign, replacing the neutral flag. German gunners already had their targets plotted. Aboard the Stanvac Calcutta, the transformation was instantaneous and shocking. Lookouts shouted warnings. Bridge officers scrambled to interpret what they were seeing. Every sailor with a sense of war understood immediately. This was a German raider, and they were about to be attacked. Without hesitation, the Steer opened fire. Her first salvo erupted from multiple gun stations. These shells were aimed at the hull, the superstructure, and the tanker's defensive gun. The German raider tactics emphasized disabling communications and armament before the enemy could react. Explosions tore into the side of the Stanvac Calcutta. Shrapnel ripped across the main deck. Smoke filled the air. The bridge shook violently as the first barrage landed. The American tanker had no equal broadside to counter. She carried one main defensive gun, typically mounted on the stern. To bring it to bear, she needed time the Germans intended to deny. Despite the chaos, the Navy armed guard acted quickly. These sailors had been drilled in emergency response. One shouted for the gun crew to man their station. Another attempted to prepare ammunition under fire. Merchant mariners helped pass shells or assisted with damage control. On the bridge, officers attempted to maneuver the ship. Though heavily damaged, the Stanvac Calcutta had a capable helm. If they could turn the stern towards the enemy, the armed guards could return fire. But maneuvering a tanker under incoming fire was difficult. The steering gear took a beating from the early hits. The captain attempted to swing the bow away from the raider, buying time. The steer targeted the radio room deliberately. German raiders always sought to prevent distress signals from reaching Allied authorities. Within moments, explosions near the communication cabin severed the tanker's ability to send a message. Even if a partial transmission was attempted, the damage and interference made success unlikely. This isolation added to the American crew's sense of urgency. They understood they could expect no immediate rescue. The steer fired again, even more accurately. Shells slammed into the deck, igniting fires. The tanker's cargo tanks, filled with volatile fuel, were at constant risk of detonation. Flames burst from ruptured pipes. Acrid smoke rolled across the vessel, hindering visibility. German gunners switched to rapid aim-to-fire. Their goal was to neutralize the engine room and prevent escape. The Stanvac Calcutta's engine telegraph still functioned, and the engineering crew continued operating despite smoke filling their compartments. At last, the American stern gun was brought to bear. The Navy armed guard fired their first shot. The recoil shook the stern. Ammunition handlers scrambled to pass the next round. The men worked under extreme danger. German shells were targeting them directly. Shrapnel flew in all directions. Witnesses aboard the steer later recalled that the American ship fought back with surprising determination. Each return shot was a declaration. They were not surrendering. The steer's guns found their mark again. A shell tore into the superstructure near the navigation bridge. Windows shattered inward. Officers were thrown from their feet. Smoke and dust choked the interior. Despite this, the American captain remained at his post, issuing orders to keep the ship maneuvering. He knew that movement was life. A stationary tanker was a doomed tanker. Burning debris littered the upper deck. The combination of flammable cargo and shell fire made firefighting nearly impossible. Hoses were deployed, but the heat was overwhelming. Crewmen used sand, blankets, and any available method to smother smaller fires. But larger blazes raged uncontrollably. The German raider now approached at a distance optimal for finishing the engagement. The Germans' gunners had full command of the battlefield. They continued focusing on the tanker's stern gun, determined to silence it. The armed guards kept firing. Shells from the tanker arced towards the steer. It is unclear whether any hit, but German records acknowledged the intensity of American resistance. Multiple compartments aboard the Stanvac Calcutta were now breached. Bulkheads buckled under pressure. Pipes burst. Smoke filled enclosed spaces. The engineering crew struggled to maintain propulsion as heat increased. Some men were already wounded. Others were unaccounted for in the confusion. As more shells struck the engine area and steering gear, the Stanvac Calcutta began to lose effective control. Her turning ability diminished. She slowed slightly. Fire spread beneath her deck plates. The armed guards continued firing, but the steer's concentrated bombardment began to take its toll. The gun platform shook violently. Ammunition supplies were threatened by fire. The American captain, recognizing that the vessel could not survive much longer, ordered his men to prepare to abandon ship. Yet many crewmen refused to leave their posts as long as the stern gun was still firing. Others assisted with lifeboats or attended to wounded sailors. The deck was a scene of heat, smoke, and confusion, but discipline remained. The armed guard fired what would be among their last rounds. The gun crew was exposed and under direct targeting. Several were injured. Ammunition stacks were depleted or inaccessible due to flames. Still, they fired again. This final resistance made a strong impression on the German crew. They had not expected such defiance. The Stanvac Calcutta was now listing slightly. Fires burned in multiple compartments. The hull had taken numerous hits. The ship was beyond saving. The captain gave the full abandon ship order. Crewmen began lowering lifeboats amid falling debris and smoke. The steer ceased heavy fire, satisfied that the ship was no longer a threat. American sailors scrambled to evacuate. Some lifeboats launched successfully. Others capsized in the rush or were damaged by earlier shell hits. Many men were forced into the water. The sea around the tanker was slick with oil. Some patches were burning, creating additional danger. Men swam beneath flame, debris, and the wreckage of their own ship. The tanker, engulfed in fire and smoke, began to settle. Her stern dipped first. Flames reached higher as oxygen rushed through broken compartments. Slowly, the ship slipped beneath the waves. The ocean swallowed her bow last. She disappeared completely, leaving behind burning slicks and scattered wreckage. The steer prepared to recover survivors. German raider doctrine emphasized taking prisoners both for intelligence and for humanitarian reasons. Lifeboats were approached carefully. Men in the water were brought aboard. For the survivors of the Stanvac Calcutta, the battle was over. But their ordeal was just beginning. They had fought hard, endured terror, and watched their ship die under them. Now they faced captivity aboard the very ship that had killed them.
That's intense. Well, I guess that goes without saying. I do have a question about how this first... And one of the things is they had a neutral flag, but then they quickly, the surprise or dropped the deception, they raised the Nazi ensign, or the German ensign. I'm not sure if it was necessarily a Nazi flag, but a German...
It would not. It'd be the German Navy ensign.
Right, exactly.
Battle ensign.
Sorry, I misspoke. Why is that necessary? Or is it necessary?
Well, technically, no. But even during World War II, there were...
Conventions, I guess? Not even
conventions
rules.
of war, but warfare was still a gentlemanly endeavor.
Affair, yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm going to present who I am before I strike, and it's this, and now I'm striking. Okay. That makes sense. This unfolded similarly to how I envisioned it. One of the things I'm curious about is whenever a ship is going down like this, many times later when we tell a story about a conflict, we'll reference the captain's log. Is that part of something that needs to be picked up and brought like into the lifeboat? Or is that... Because what I'm picturing is all the instructions I've gotten on an airplane of leave everything behind, get out. With a ship, it could be different. And then if you're the captain in particular, it could be very different. So do you know if the log just goes down with the ship, or what's the deal there?
It depends on the situation. If everybody on the bridge has been killed, obviously nobody's able to grab the log before going to a lifeboat. If not, then yeah, the log's right there. It's updated constantly throughout the
Right.
day. That's easy to just grab and go.
Okay. It seems like such an important thing to take, so I wasn't sure what the convention was. Lastly, I was unaware of the Germans' doctrine of taking captives in this way, but I guess I pictured submarines, and so putting a bunch of prisoners on a submarine seems difficult and possibly dangerous. But if you're on a surface ship, especially one that is big enough to disguise itself as a transport, that makes total sense. I guess we just don't hear that much about it because this doesn't happen as often as the submarine attacks. Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens next.
When the Stanvac Calcutta slipped beneath the Atlantic, the battle ended. But the story did not. For the American survivors scattered in the water, the next phase of their ordeal began immediately. Their ship was gone, their cargo was lost, their comrades were wounded or missing, and the only vessel still afloat was the very ship that had killed them. The German raider doctrine included the capture of prisoners when possible. Although engaged in hostile action, raiders also operated under the broader traditions of naval warfare, in which rendering aid to surviving sailors was often expected. Moreover, survivors held intelligence value. They could reveal convoy schedules, cargo manifests, or shipping routes. The Steer deployed small boats to pick up Americans from the water. For the survivors, the moment was tense and confusing. Many had fought fiercely only minutes earlier. Now, they were faced with the prospect of being brought aboard the enemy vessel. Some men were exhausted from burns, injuries, or inhalation of smoke. Others were shaken by the sudden transition from combat to captivity. They were pulled aboard the small German boats and taken to the raider. Aboard the Steer, the atmosphere was a mixture of discipline, curiosity, and respect. German sailors understood that the Americans had fought hard under impossible conditions. Some raider crewmen later recalled that they admired the determination of the armed guard and the merchant crew. Once on board, the Americans were accounted for, searched, and given basic medical treatment. The wounded were examined by the ship's medical staff. Though conditions were cramped and resources limited, the Germans conducted rudimentary care. Survivors were given clothing or blankets, and some were offered a ration of food and water once the immediate chaos settled. But humanitarian gestures did not change the reality. The Americans were now prisoners of war. Conditions aboard the Steer were constrained. As a raider, she was designed for deception and combat, not for transporting large numbers of prisoners. Space was tight. Prisoners were confined to specific compartments, often below deck, where ventilation was limited. Their movements were restricted, and they were kept under guard at all times. The morale of the Americans varied. Some were relieved simply to be alive. Others worried about the unknown, how long they would be held, whether they would be transferred, and whether they would survive the rest of the war. The psychological shift from defending their ship to living under enemy control was abrupt. The food was sparse by Allied standards. The Steer herself lived under rationing. Water was similarly limited, especially in the heat of tropical or equatorial regions. Prisoners were sometimes put to work, cleaning compartments or assisting with minor tasks, though this depended on the condition of the ship and the needs of the crew. Importantly, the Americans soon realized they were not alone. The Steer had captured survivors from previous sinkings. Merchant sailors from other Allied nations were also aboard, creating a multicultural group of prisoners. They exchanged stories, shared what they knew about the war's progress, and gave each other support. Despite the uncertainty, time aboard the Steer passed in a structured but stressful rhythm. Prisoners remained confined during alerts. German officers occasionally questioned them, looking for information about shipping patterns or American naval practices. The prisoners typically gave limited or non-operational information. following instructions taught in pre-deployment briefings. After the sinking of the Stanvac Calcutta, the Steer continued her raiding voyage. The ship still had supplies, ammunition, and fuel from her recent rendezvous with her supply ship. Captain Gerlache aimed to extend her operational range for as long as possible. The Steer's crew remained vigilant. They practiced deception tactics, switched flags when needed, and scanned the horizon constantly for targets or threats. But the Atlantic was becoming more dangerous. Allied air patrols were expanding. Radio intelligence was improving, and the Allied escort coverage was slowly increasing. Surface raiders were becoming relics of an earlier stage of the war. Still, the Steer pushed on. Eventually, the raiders sought to enter the South Atlantic and operate closer to shipping lanes connecting South America, Africa, and the United States. These routes were busy with tankers, troop transports, and the merchantmen supplying Allied forces. But the Steer would not complete her.
Well, I am really interested in this whole dynamic because when you start talking about air patrols or radio communication or just some of the more modern tools that are developing at this time and how that affects overall strategy for not just the Navy, but all facets of the war. I'm just imagining like 1600s Caribbean or maybe 1700s piracy, just ships coming out of nowhere sailing in. But if you had radar or air patrols and you're like, oh, yeah, they're coming out of that cove, watch out. Piracy would become a relic much earlier just because you would know what to look for. You would know where they are. You would know how to avoid them. And I can imagine the same is happening here, except the ships are bigger, right? It's not just a sloop, but you're talking about a huge tanker surface ship that's disguised, a disguised raider. So I can see the end happening quickly for this, and why the Germans leaned more into submarines just because they're much harder to detect. Now, air patrols and whatnot and radio do help to kind of locate these subs, but finding a sub certainly is much harder than these surface ships. So, also, it's interesting to me that all these prisoners are allowed to talk to each other because the encouragement that they're giving each other or the information they're exchanging seems like it would be to the detriment of their captors. You know what I mean? You would want to demoralize them. You would want to kind of break them a little bit to get what you want out of them, I would think. But I'm not an expert as far as interrogating captives, so what do I know? Anyway.
Well, it's also kind of hard to isolate a couple hundred people in confined spaces that they have.
That's true. Especially if you're limiting all of them to a specific area of the ship, that's where they're going to be. So that makes sense. Yeah, let's see what happens.
On the 27th of September, 1942, just 3.5 months after the sinking of the Stanvac Calcutta, the Steer encountered the American freighter SS Stephen Hopkins. The Hopkins was a Liberty ship, armed with a single 4-inch gun and manned by a Navy Armed Guard detachment, similar to the one aboard the Stanvac Calcutta. But the Hopkins proved to be a uniquely determined opponent. When the Steer revealed her guns and demanded surrender, the Hopkins refused. The American ship turned to engage, opening fire. The battle between the Hopkins and the Steer was intense, closer, and far more destructive for the German raider. The Hopkins gunners scored multiple direct hits on the Steer's vital areas. Fires broke out aboard the raider. Her engine room was damaged. German damage control struggled to contain the destruction. In the end, the Stephen Hopkins, though mortally damaged and destined to sink, managed to inflict fatal wounds on the Steer. The German raider was no longer seaworthy. The captain ordered his crew to scuttle the ship. Explosive charges were set. The Steer was abandoned and soon sank beneath the waves. This marked the end of one of the last German surface raiders in the Atlantic. With the Steer destroyed, the fate of her prisoners became a complex chain of transfers and uncertainties. Some survivors of the Stanvac Calcutta were moved to other German vessels before the Steer's final battle. Others were aboard the raider until just before or during the sinking. Those left aboard were taken off the Steer's accompanying supply ship or by lifeboats and brought to the other German-controlled locations. Ultimately, most Stanvac Calcutta survivors were transported to European ports under German control or to Vichy-controlled territories. From there, they were processed as prisoners of war. Their captivity varied widely. Some spent months imprisoned, others more than a year. Eventually, with the liberation of Europe and the defeat of Germany, the surviving men were repatriated. Their stories were recorded, though not all became widely known. Many returned to the Merchant Marine or to the Navy. Their courage was recognized later, especially as the importance of the Merchant Marine during the war became more appreciated. The sinking of the Stanvac Calcutta and the later destruction of the Steer illustrated two key truths about the mid-war Atlantic. First, that isolated merchant ships were extraordinarily vulnerable. Second, that even lightly armed American ships were determined, could inflict devastating losses on German raiders. The Stanvac Calcutta did not survive her engagement, but her crew fought as long as they could, and the resistance echoed the same determined spirit later displayed by the Stephen Hopkins. Both actions demonstrated that American merchant ships, even when outgunned, were not passive targets.
You were getting so much better at anticipating my questions, I just want to say, because as soon as the German raider was scuttled, I was like, what happened to the prisoners? You went right into it. I'm like, okay, thank you, Dale. So what an interesting component to the war. This is, and I've said this in previous episodes, the highlights, so to speak, of the war, like the major battles, the major decisions, you read about those. You learn about those in history class, but these type of engagements are often overlooked. And it's really interesting to hear about them, to hear how it unfolded, what the thinking was on both sides, and how it went down, and how it affected other things going forward. Like, this is one of the reasons I really enjoy hearing these stories, and then also getting to probe you as a retired Navy man yourself to understand, well, what is the thinking here? Why did they do this? Or I appreciate it. This has been another episode where I've learned multiple things, and that is a victory for me. Thanks.
Okay, so to finish this up, we're going to analyze what the engagement meant for the broader war, what lessons it revealed, and how it fit into the evolving role of the U.S. Merchant Marine and the Navy Armed Guard. The action of June 6th was small in scale, but its implications were far-reaching. Merchant ships were the arteries of Allied logistics. Their survival or loss could alter the pace of troop movements, the availability of aviation fuel, and the sustainment of distant bases. Even a single tanker, like the Stanvac Calcutta, represented thousands of miles of mobility for aircraft, fleets, and armies. This brief battle underscores a strategic weakness that plagued the Allies in early 1942, the vulnerability of unescorted ships. The U.S. had not yet synchronized its convoy system across the Atlantic. Destroyers and escort vessels were still stretched thin, with many deployed to the Pacific after Pearl Harbor. As a result, American tankers and cargo ships often sailed alone, trusting luck more than protection. The German surface raiders took advantage of this. Their entire mission was to exploit lightly defended shipping. The Steer's attack on the Stanvac Calcutta wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a pattern of opportunistic strikes that Germany hoped would disrupt Allied supply lines. However, the war was changing. As radar, long-range aircraft, improved code breaking, and broader convoy coverage took hold, raiders like the Steer became increasingly vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Their disguises no longer guaranteed safety. They could be cornered, tracked, and eventually destroyed. The Steer's own end at the hands of the Stephen Hopkins proved that merchant ships were becoming tougher targets and that the armed guard could be a formidable force even under punishing odds. The story also reinforces the incredible bravery of the merchant mariners. They were civilians on the front line, hauling oil, ammunition, food, and troops through waters filled with submarines, mines, and disguised warships. They did so without acclaim, often without adequate defenses, and often without certainty of rescue. Their casualty rates, percentage-wise, were among the highest of any American service in the war.
Wow.
The Navy Armed Guard, a small detachment of sailors placed aboard merchant ships, quickly became a vital part of at-sea defense. Their stern guns and anti-aircraft weapons could not always save their ship, but they provided a measure of resistance that complicated German plans and preserved American morale. The action of June 6th revealed that armed guards and the merchant marine for what they were: courageous, capable, and essential to the Allied victory. Beyond the strategic details lies the human side of the story. Most of the men aboard the Stanvac Calcutta had not enlisted expecting to face naval gunfire. They were tanker engineers, cooks, deckhands, radio operators, and civilian officers. The Naval Armed Guard were young sailors, many in their teens or early 20s, often trained quickly and sent straight into hazardous waters. In the space of 15 minutes, these men were forced into a life or death struggle. They defended their ship until it became impossible to continue. Their service was not celebrated in major headlines, yet they embodied the quiet heroism of wartime merchant shipping. Captivity brought its own ordeal. The adjustment to life as prisoners, confined aboard the raider that had attempted to kill them, demanded mental resilience. Those who survived imprisonment carried the experience with them long after the war. While this battle is lesser known than major naval battles, it holds a distinct place in maritime history. It highlights the global nature of the Battle of the Atlantic, stretching far beyond North American and European waters. It illustrates the last operational phase of German surface raiders, and it preserves the memory of the merchant mariners who faced dangers equal to those experienced by the fleet. Today, historians view engagements like this one as snapshots of a transitional moment. By mid to late 1942, German raider operations were nearing extinction, replaced by submarine resilience. Meanwhile, the United States was rapidly fielding stronger escorts, more capable anti-submarine forces, and safer convoy routes. The Stanvac Calcutta's final stand, therefore, serves as both a testament to early war vulnerability and a marker of the Allies' accelerating mastery of the seas.
You know, I'd never really appreciated fully until listening to many episodes of this podcast what the Merchant Marines did for the war effort. And I think the more we dive into that, the more we see how crucial they were, not only in transporting vital supplies, but in resistance. Like when you were talking about the morale not diminishing and fighting against impossible odds, it takes a special kind of person to be able to do that. You know what I mean? And I'm grateful to the folks that put themselves on the line to get us that much closer to victory. Every time they sailed out, they were unsure they were going to make it back. They didn't have the full complement of arms that a naval vessel would have, and they just had to rely on instincts and training and discipline, like you said, like when we saw with the ship whose name escapes me right now, not to hear, but the one that fought against. That's pretty impressive, and I think they deserve more notoriety.
And that brings us to the close of this episode. The action of June 6, 1942, between the American tanker Stanvac Calcutta and the German raider Steer may not appear in Hollywood films or giant history books, but it represents something vital: the courage of ordinary sailors, the risks faced by merchant crews, and the vast, often unseen struggle to keep the sea lanes open during mankind's most devastating conflict. These stories remind us that the war at sea was not defined by only aircraft carriers and battleships. It was defined also by tankers, freighters, and the civilian men who steered them through hostile waters. It was defined by the armed guard sailors who stood watch day and night, knowing that their ship might be alone when the danger came. At the end of all our episodes, we like to honor one of our fallen angels. And today, with the help of Hero Cards US, and today we want to honor Flight Officer Benny R. Carbajal. His hometown was Goliad, Texas. Served with the U.S. Army Air Corps, 77th Fighter Squadron, 20th Fighter Group. He received the Air Medal, Purple Heart. His date of sacrifice was July 5th, 1944. Killed in action near Neumünster, Germany. He was 22. Benny was born in August of 1921 in Goliad, Texas. In November of 1940, at the age of 19, he enlisted in the Army at Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio. He was assigned to the United States Army Air Corps, the precursor of the Air Force, later established in 1947. Sent to the European theater during World War II, Benny served as a P-38J fighter-bomber pilot with the 77th Fighter Squadron, part of the 20th Fighter Group. The P-38's unique design was first introduced in 1941. The planes featured a pair of engines on a twin-boom configuration with a single pilot in a central pod. A horizontal bar joined the two tail booms. Allied forces claimed that the aircraft had been nicknamed the Forked-Tailed Devil by the Germans, and two planes, one pilot by the Japanese. Intended for long-range, high-altitude flight, the versatile P-38 was used for aerial reconnaissance photography, as a general fighter, and as a long-range escort fighter. It was the only fighter aircraft in Europe capable of escorting bombers deep into Germany. Benny's 20th Fighter Group arrived in Clyde, Scotland in August 1943 before moving to their home air base in King's Cliff, Northamptonshire, England. Flying across the English Channel, pilots escorted bombers and strafed ground targets in addition to attacking enemy planes. The 20th Fighter Group was given the nickname Loco Busters because of their unique ability to hit locomotive targets. Operating at high altitudes in the cold European sky generated a variety of issues for the P-38s that had gone unnoticed while flying at lower altitudes and in warmer climates of North Africa and the Pacific Theater. Superchargers would frequently fail, forcing the pilot to shut down the engine. As a result, many of the aircraft were forced to cancel missions and return to base. Several planes were lost due to engine failures rather than hostile action. On January 5th, 1944, Lieutenant Carbajal departed from King's Cliff Air Base, flying northeast on a target support mission to the strategically important port city of Kiel on Germany's Baltic Sea coast. His plane was lost under unknown circumstances, and he was declared killed in action. A recipient of the Air Medal and Purple Heart, Benny Carbajal was buried in the American Cemetery in Belgium, Plot A, Row 9, Grave 12. So, Flight Officer Benny R. Carbajal, we thank you.
Thank you.
Get us out of here, Christoph.
All right, will do, Captain. Thank you so much, listeners, for joining us again for yet another episode. I hope you learned something like I did. It's really cool to get into the nuance of different conflicts and see what the Navy has had to do over the years. If you ever want to get a hold of us, you can in a couple of different ways. You can email us, usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We're also on X Twitter with a handle of USNHistoryPod. And then we also have a Discord server. Now, I know you've heard a lot of bad things about other people's Discord servers, But we don't let that fly in our Discord server. So go ahead, join up. Have the confidence that your life will be enhanced if you join up. And you can talk to us and other listeners. It's fantastic. Also, if you review and rate this show on the podcast provider of your choice, that would help us. You can not only tell the internet that way, but you can also tell friends and family and your classmates. I know some of you are in school. Go ahead and tell them about us too. Once again, thank you for sticking with us, for listening, and I hope we continue to deliver things that you enjoy listening to. Thanks.
And with that, we're going to wish you guys fair winds and following seas. Goodbye.
Bye.